everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And welcome to this week's preview for the upcoming K-State football game up against Oklahoma State, where K-State looks to get right back onto the horse after the game that shall not be named. But before we get into the scouting report for the Oklahoma State Cowboys, we do want to thank the sponsors of the show, and that is Greg Arthur and Grandma.
Thank you,
Grandma. And if you want to support the show financially, it costs as little as $1 every month to help support the show and have your name read out at the beginning of every single episode. But let's go ahead and just dive straight in to the Oklahoma State Cowboys as my cat decides that she wants in my closet, which you may hear. She is trying to break down my closet door. Either that or this is her strange way of trying to get onto the episode. But in terms of what this Oklahoma State team has done so far, they are a 3-1 team with impressive victories over South Dakota State and Tulsa, a sweaty up against Arkansas where you could argue they probably should have lost, and then a game against Utah that is not as close as the final score would make you believe. So they're entering this game in a very similar situation to K-State, where they destroyed their FCS opponent, had a sweaty game against a team they probably shouldn't have, and had a relatively impressive victory. It's just in a different order, only to drop their first conference game. The only difference is Oklahoma State played theirs at home, and Utah's a significantly better team than BYU. But this is, in a lot of ways, we can't say that this is, another case of the Oklahoma State non-con barely counting towards their existence, because we actually get them when they've played a conference game up to this point.
Yeah, which is a nice change, because it just does feel like we get them early so often. But we do know a lot about this Oklahoma State team, just because they return so much of their key pieces, particularly on offense. I mean, like pretty much everybody we've seen before. So there, in theory, shouldn't be as many surprises. I think their entire offensive line is back too. I think they have a pretty similar line situation that we did last year, where like a huge group of seniors all decided to come back. So I think we're in the same, they're in the similar boat this year as we were last year. So.
Yeah, which now my cat is climbing my clothes in my closet. She's a fascinating little creature. But we'll just dive straight into the offensive scheming. And Connor, we'll normally do the color commentary, but I mean, this is an Oklahoma State team, so they haven't changed much in terms of offensive philosophy.
No, I mean, it's Mike Gundy. He's a creature of habit, and has been pretty similar for a while. But they blend their elements of wide split, veer and shoot with more of a spread power concept that we see from some of the early Snyder years. So lots of 10 and 11 personnel. The 11, they're mostly using an H-back. They have like a specific name for their fullbacks.
Cowboy.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I knew they had some name, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was. They love pistol sets, which is fitting, because, I mean, of course it is Pistol Pete.
Do you think they did that on purpose?
I hope so, but if they didn't, it's a fun surprise. And I like pistol a lot too, so it works either way. But it gives them a lot of versatility to change directions of the run and keep an offense guessing. They do run some offset shotgun as well, though. But it's going to be a lot of pistol from them. But I mean, that's pretty reliable formula for Oklahoma State.
Yeah, it feels super weird too, because you have a lot of modern concepts in the Oklahoma State offense in terms of formations and like how wide their splits are, but a lot of it is sort of more traditional passing concepts from those alignments, which is super strange. And outside of the occasional counter, which is a mostly new thing for them, they've still run the same, inside out zone stuff. But I, it's sort of this weird hodgepodge of those goes all of my towels. Thank you, Wunkus. But she is determined to get involved in this episode. But it's a weird blend of splits with more traditional passing concepts, and it makes for a really interesting offense to study. But Connor, you have the motion and their, we'll call them money situation statistics.
Yeah. I mean, they're like pretty much every other college football team in terms of how they use motion. They use it as a tool to get guys open, indicate coverage. I mean, that's I would say the bare minimum standard of motion usage, and they'll do that plenty. And this year they've converted about 37% of their third downs, and 92% of their red zone possessions end in points, which is really good, but only 65% ending in touchdowns. So not as good there. So they are entirely capable of stalling out once they get inside the 20.
Yeah, and that's also been a very traditional Mike do, is have an offense that's really, really, consistently solid from the your 20-yard line to the other 20-yard line, and then just not at all good in the red zone. That's sort of been their calling card for the past, like 3 or 4 years. They just
kind of
can't.
feels like it.
They just can't execute that well in getting touchdowns in the red zone. But they've always had a pretty decent kicker to make up for that fact. But, of course, Connor, you have the more general pieces of the passing game next as well.
Yeah, they run a pretty decent amount of play action, 31%, which, I mean, with a running back like Ollie Gordon and a good offensive line, that's entirely worth doing, running a lot of play action. They're on 14% screen rates. Their route tree, though, isn't super complex. They run slants, goes, hitches, and sometimes they'll run in routes. But they don't have a really extensive route tree that they seem to be running.
Yeah, much like the Habsburg family tree, it's very powerful, tends to be spread out very far, but there's not enough branches for it to be that sustainable. But this is one of those rare offenses where explaining concepts is almost kind of, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but it's not as productive as with other teams because, yeah, you still get your traditional, slants, bubble screens, stuff like that. But just because the route tree is so generally limited, you're more having guys run individual routes and hoping that they win, which, granted, Oklahoma State has pretty much always had the receivers to have that be a valid strategy. And this year's team is no exception to that.
Yeah, they seem to always have some really great receivers. And Brennan Presley's been around there for like 20 years at this point. But we'll talk more about their running game first, though. Lots of zone, occasional counter to keep the defense honest. However, keeping the defense honest with the counter hasn't really mattered that much for them because for some reason they have just been awful running the football this year, which is really strange because they return so much on an offensive line that's been so effective. And they also have Ollie Gordon as well, who was in the Heisman conversation for a while last year. So really, really strange that they haven't been able to do much. I think a lot of it also stems back to their quarterback because he's been pretty inconsistent, to put it mildly, and who could have seen that coming, I guess. But I guess that's a good segue into notable offensive players.
Yeah, which before we get into that, it really is just sort of surprising how not good the running game has been, but you touched on it. A lot of that does start with the quarterback not necessarily being a threat. And yes, this lesson is, I wonder if it's finally stuck. I'm not going to be graciously calling teams or people not good, or at least wantonly doing that. However, Alan Bowman, I feel like the sample size is big enough here to comfortably give him the stamp of not good. He's not bad. He's not awful. He's not the worst quarterback in the Big 12. He's not good.
Yeah, he's also really old. Second oldest QB in the Big 12. Only Cam Rising is older, I think. So if Rising had been healthy, it would have been a battle of geriatrics last week down in Stillwater. But Bowman, he is pretty much. I mean, he is what he is, really. K-State's seen him before in two different uniforms. Some moments he's a gunslinger, other times he is a game manager. I mean, like, he's gone from being fantastic and throwing darts to getting benched last week. Last week he got benched for at least a few series. He doesn't have a strong arm. He turns it over a lot. But you can't really say that he's awful. Like Ace said, he got benched for a while last week, but still somehow is not awful. He is a very persistent quarterback, if nothing else. And he just has lots of bad habits from bad footwork. But I guess it might be fair to say, is a rhythm quarterback. If you let him get confident and think that he's good, then he will be. So you have to remind him that he's just an okay quarterback. And if you can do that, then you may be safe. But don't allow Alan Bowman to get confident.
Yeah, because a lot of Alan Bowman's game is sort of based on he's not going to he will occasionally make a really, really impressive throw, and then he just won't miss a whole lot in terms of, the gimmies until he starts maybe, we'll say if he gets into a bad rhythm, and then he's probably one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the Big 12. The problem with Alan Bowman is just the ebbs and flows. I don't think that there is a less consistent quarterback than Alan Bowman. And it's not even because he swings from being, this tier 1 first round guy to, being like putrid. How did this guy even make the roster? It's just that he swings from pretty all right to pretty bad. And it's like a play-by-play thing.
Yeah, it's not just the degree of the swings, but the frequency of them. I guess is a good way to put it. That, and also based on what Oklahoma State fans have been saying this season, he's not getting a lot of help from the play calling. Which, to be fair, name a fan base that isn't perpetually upset with their offensive coordinator. I have a beachfront property to sell you at Tuttle Creek, so it's perpetual issue, fan base to fan base. But that takes us into the next notable offensive player, who is not only the most notable for this team, but was one of the most notable in the entire country, to the point where he was kind of getting some scuttlebutt as an outsider to make the cover of this year's college football game, which again is not the end all be all of what makes a player good or bad, but in a conference that has Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, the fact he was even in the conversation is worth mentioning, if nothing else. And then he got DUI. And so, but other than that, he's also a really big evaluation L for us. We didn't think super highly of him, and he is very obviously been the opposite of that. He's made his name as one of the best running backs in the entire country. Last year, he was just absolutely fantastic. I think he had 20 rushing touchdowns last year.
Something
And
ridiculous like that.
yeah, just absurd numbers from Ollie Gordon. I mean, he was getting some projections as a first round running back, which in today's day and age, that is not an easy feat because running back value in the NFL is at an all time low. If you can find yourself getting graded that highly as a running back, then you are doing something right. I mean, last year his tape was absolutely fantastic and didn't really have anything in the way of weaknesses. He's got good speed, great twitch, and really good contact balance. Um, and he's 6'2", 230 pounds, so he's really tough to tackle on top of it. His stats this year are not good at all. It's been a major struggle bus for Ollie Gordon so far this season, but he is much more talented than his stat line currently says. I mean, he's averaging 3.5 yards per carry at the moment. He is due to reemerge at any given moment. So that could very easily be us. So don't just box score watch and sleep on him because he could very easily just burst for like 150 and barely break a sweat.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the reason why Ollie Gordon has taken such a step back this year, I don't even really think it's his fault. I just think it's teams saying, okay, we have a choice here. Do we try to beat Ollie Gordon and then make Alan Bowman beat us? Or do we try to make Alan Bowman beat us while letting go of Ollie? Well, or do we let Ollie Gordon beat us and try to contain Alan Bowman? Let me tell you that there is probably no easier question to answer than that question right there. Because they don't, a lot of what Oklahoma State does offensively is quick. And I mean, Alan Bowman's time to throw is like sub 2 seconds, and that's including on his deep ball. So you're not going to sack him, but you can still put a bunch of guys on the line of scrimmage and say, yeah, no, we're not going to let Ollie Gordon beat us. Thanks. No, thanks. And the offensive line is just not good enough to compensate for that fact, which, being completely fair to them, there are not many offensive lines. So, I mean, you look at Ollie Gordon and you look at even some of the runs where, he's just a hair away from breaking it. And you see it. You see the Ollie Gordon from last year, and he just hasn't gotten that opportunity to really show it yet because there's not a team in the country that's willing to let him try. And I don't blame them.
Yeah, I mean, every team strategy against Oklahoma State should be to contain Ollie Gordon at all costs. I mean, he's really only had one decent game this year, and that was the first game against South Dakota State. And even then, it wasn't a fantastic day. He had 126 yards, but it took him 28 carries to get there. I wouldn't be shocked if they try to involve him a little bit more as a receiver going forward, because towards the end of the Utah game, they were very clearly trying to do that because he just had a really rough day against Utah, only 11 carries for 42 yards. But he had 3 receptions. So we really do need to look out for different ways that Oklahoma State may try and get Ollie Gordon the football in space. And just, we may look at it and say 6'2", 230. He's going to still be incredibly difficult to take down in space, not just because he can go through you, but because he can go around you as well. So there's not really a perfect way to stop Ollie Gordon other than hold on for dear life and wait for backup. And which, if there's one thing this defense can do, it's flow to the ball. I'm talking about K-State's defense. So there may be some hope there, but it's going to require some really good tackling. But I'd imagine we see a lot of contain on Ollie Gordon this week.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. But now we get to talk about the two big receivers, big for as in their impact. One genuinely is big, the other's just not.
Yeah, they are the exact opposite, really, in that regard. Brennan Presley is the first one. He is definitely not a big receiver in terms of stature. He's 5'8", 175. So definitely not the biggest guy in the world. But he's a projected day 3 pick that could maybe creep his way into being a late day 2 guy. And despite his stature, he has been one of the most reliable wide receivers in the Big 12 for several years now for multiple quarterbacks. He's in his 5th year of playing at Oklahoma State. He all the way back as a true freshman in 2020, he had over 100 yards in the last 3 seasons. Before this one, he's had at least 600 yards in all of them. Last year, he was 9 yards shy of hitting 1,000 receiving yards. So Brandon Presley has had a prolific career. He will almost certainly cross 3,000 receiving yards this season. He is about 250 away, a little less actually. So almost certainly going to cross 3,000. Given the distance that he is from that number, let's make sure he does not cross it against us, because that would be really, really embarrassing. But he's a really great security blanket wide receiver. And he's a good vertical guy too. I mean, he's pretty quick. You have to be with his stature. He has really crisp route running, and he's good at working his way into gaps and zone coverage. He is kind of your stereotypical idea of a slot security blanket wide receiver, but he's been around for a long time, and he's been on both ends, on winning and losing ends of blowouts in the K-State Oklahoma State matchups. So he's familiar with us. We're just as familiar with him. So it's going to be a tall task, no pun intended, to keep him contained as well, which luckily Alabama's been really iffy this year. So hopefully that will cover up some of that, but you can't leave him wide open short, because he can make people miss and take it the distance from a long distance.
Yeah, he's a very, very good playmaker as a receiver. And that very much goes with his if you look at his PFF target chart, over 60% of his targets are over the middle of the field. So he's pretty consistently the second read, and he's pretty consistently open on that part of the field. It's also worth noting he has not registered a drop on this year. And he just has that reliable pair of hands that you really want from that slot receiver. So the only real knock on Brendan Presley is the fact he's 5'8", so he's limited to the slot. But even then, he's undoubtedly the best true slot in the Big 12. Like I don't feel like there's any debating that.
No, I don't think it's particularly close. He's lucky that Seth Porter ran out of eligibility, though, so he could have that distinction. That takes us into the last notable offensive player, and that's DeJon Stribling, former Washington State wide receiver. He had a couple of really good seasons there. And then last year, he got hurt pretty early in the season, but was off to a good start. So I think he only played in 3 games and still almost had 200 yards. This year, he's making up for lost time. Granted, most of it came in a just behemoth performance against Tulsa, where he had 7 catches for 174 and 2 touchdowns. So in any other year, any normal year, that would be probably the best receiving performance for a single game in the Big 12. But there's a Tet McMillan in this conference, so he's still 125 yards short there. But he's got 345 yards receiving, a couple touchdowns, and he brings pretty good size to the receiver position as well, 6'2", 200. K-State does have some larger cornerbacks, though. Keenan Garber's 6 foot, and then Donovan McIntosh, while inexperienced, is 6'3" and around 200 pounds as well. So there are potential options there for matching him in terms of size, although K-State seems to have not cared about that much. I mean, we're playing Jacob Parrish on Tet McMillan pretty consistently, and he, for all intents and purposes, is fine. So, but DeJon Stribling, he's a late day 3 guy. Blends a lot of skill sets together. He's, like many Oklahoma State receivers, a vertical threat that has really good contested catch upside. So there's kind of shades of Baylor wide receiver archetype here. Like he's even got about the correct measurables for it. Just throw the ball up. He's really fast. He'll probably win a 50-50. I mean, that feels like a classic Baylor receiver to me. But yeah, this is a really good receiver as well to pair with Brennan Presley.
Yeah. Also, I don't really have anything to add there, but this is just a fun fact. He has exactly 1 target on the right side of the field this year. This man plays on the left side of the field and the left side of the field exclusively. He has 1 single target on the right side of the field.
That is interesting. Now, I don't expect you to know the answer to this, but like, I'm just curious. I'm sure some people that are listening as well. Do you think that's a DeJon Stribling thing or an Alan Bowman thing?
I think it's probably a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I would guess that it has a lot to do with how Oklahoma State sort of runs their sets, to where Stribling is going to be the isolated, like, true number 1 receiver. And that just how happens to be the left on a lot of situations. But it also could be that, Alan Bowman prefers throwing the deep ball to his left, because you get as a right-handed quarterback, you get a little bit more room for arc there. I mean, it's a couple of inches at most, but it's still notable for how a quarterback would want to throw the deep ball. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting. He just lines up to the left.
No, I mean, that is super interesting. That's really odd. But more power to him. It seems to be working. He's leading Oklahoma State in receiving by a fairly decent margin, at least in terms of yards.
Yeah. But now we can talk about the Oklahoma State defense after talking about their offense, as we do. So, Connor, as always, you have the more general notes of the team.
Yeah. This Oklahoma State team, they are probably the team that taught Joe Klanderman and Chris Kleiman the 3-3-5 defense. Although since that time, they've changed several things about their defense. They've moved towards kind of a true 4-2 or 3-3 hybrid with a few different fronts. It kind of moving back to a 4-2, or at least starting to include more 4-man fronts, seems to kind of be the current trend in the Big 12. Like K-State's done the same. And a few other teams are starting to not necessarily move away from the 3-3-5, but maybe get a little bit more hybrid, maybe multiple, as opposed to just running a pure base 3-3-5, which is interesting to see how things go as time goes on, which I'd imagine is the response to just the stellar running back play in the conference right now. But back to Oklahoma State. They prefer to play man coverage. They've generally been really good at it as well. They play both press and off coverages, and their brand of man coverage is really aggressive as well. They're trying to jump routes as often as they can if they see an opportunity to break.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting part about how they play the coverage, a lot of time they're actually playing cover 1, and the way that they play their man coverage is more often how you would expect them to play, with 2-man under cover 5, which 2-man and cover 5 are the exact same thing. I just like calling it 2-man because cover 5 sounds disgusting. But they have that sort of aggressive brand of corner, which, I mean, I don't think that's definitely a change from the last few years of Oklahoma State, where I think it might have been an adjustment, because one of the biggest problems that Oklahoma State has sort of perennially had in the last few years is secondary communication, which makes zone coverage a lot more difficult. I mean, that's basically the entire reason why 49-0 happened, was secondary miscommunication. But yeah, they play a lot of cover one hole in particular. Either that or their middle linebackers just playing a really, really bad spy on Zach Wilson's brother, which more power to you, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting because they sort of blend philosophies in their man coverage, where they play the aggressive brand that you see more typically from two high structures, and they play it in a sort of one high cover one situation. Granted, that is a little bit because of who their free safety is, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and some of that could be their scheme changes. That could be that they have a different defensive coordinator. Because I think that 2022 game, it was Derek Mason, I'm pretty sure. And they have a new guy named Brian Nardo.
Yeah, he was there last year.
Yeah, he was there last year, and they just plucked him from Division II, which is such a Mike Gundy thing to do. Is just go out and find some random coaching prodigy from like a random school. I guess the connection's probably that for Nardo was a defensive coordinator and linebackers coach for like 8 years in Emporia State, which is also where Gunnar Gundy is at now as a starting quarterback. Did you see he threw like 75 passes?
Oh my God.
This last week. Yeah, he went like 49 for 74 and like 500 yards and like 3 touchdowns or something like that.
Trade offer. You receive Division I defensive coordinator. We receive really mid quarterback who will throw 100 pitches.
That's pretty much what happened there, I guess. I really don't know what to make of it. I just thought that was funny. But yeah, it's a interesting defense. But getting to some more specific stuff, they've excelled this year at limiting the damage in the red zone. Only 64% of red zone possessions are resulting in points, and only 36% of those are resulting in touchdowns. So those are some absolutely fantastic numbers in the red zone, particularly that touchdown number. Granted, it is through only 4 games, so that number is almost assuredly going to go up. But regardless of time point, it is hard to keep teams from scoring once they get inside the 20-yard line. I mean, they call it the red zone for a reason. And so that's a really impressive number from Oklahoma State.
Yeah, which is super strange because it's not like in terms of scoring, they've been this elite defense. I mean, they've given up 20, 31, 10 against Tulsa, and then 22 up against Utah. They haven't been this elite defensive unit, which sort of tells you to sort of give you a peek behind the curtain here. Because of how they play their man coverage, they are susceptible to explosive plays when given the opportunity. They're also really susceptible to getting penalized on the outside with PI, which I think happened like, if I'm remembering correctly, it happened like 3 or 4 times up against Utah. And that was in Boone Pickens Stadium.
Yeah. I'm definitely very aggressive, but that'll take us into the notable defensive players. Although arguably the most notable player on the entire defense is a guy that is not expected to play, at least as of right now, and that's Colin Oliver, who has long been considered to be one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12, although he's kind of been getting held back recently by injuries. He's projected to be an early day 3 guy at the moment. Talent-wise, that is probably selling him short. That he's been extremely versatile, a really important piece of the Oklahoma State defense. They were really missing him against Utah. He's probably not going to end up playing against K-State.
Yeah, I think he was listed as being out for a month last I checked. And this was an injury he sustained during the Tulsa game. No, it was during the Arkansas game because he didn't play in Tulsa, I don't think. But yeah, he's been hurt. And if you would have asked me before the season, I would have told you that Oklahoma State has two of the best players, two of the best defensive players in the Big 12 on their roster. I mean, of course, no one's clearing Travis Hunter. I don't think anyone was going to ever clear Travis Hunter. But, I mean, Colin Oliver and Nick Martin are both so unbelievably good. And I think the big knock on Colin Oliver is sort of that he is being used as a Swiss Army knife. I mean, it's the same reason that D. Winters wasn't viewed all that highly in a lot of NFL draft talk. Because D. Winters was sort of that hybrid linebacker, edge rusher, like linebacker who really liked blitzing but could still do other stuff. Colin Oliver was, honestly, I think the whole like day 3 thing, he should be rated higher than that. And it could be injuries are holding him back. But them missing Colin Oliver, if he is indeed out for a month, like the research I did suggested, that is a massive loss for this Oklahoma State defense. Honestly, they probably would have beat Utah if they had Colin Oliver. That's how much of a difference maker he is.
Yeah, he's definitely struggled a bit since his breakout season, because back in 2021, he had 11 and a half sacks that season. Since then, he hasn't had more than 6 in a year. And so now he's dealing with injuries too. So it's a bit of a difficult slide for him, but he's still an immensely talented player. But that takes us into the players that actually are going to be playing. We'll start with Nick Martin at linebacker. He's another projected early day 3 pick. Last year had over 140 tacklers. He led the team. He's somebody that just flies around on tape. And for a true linebacker, he has exceptional athleticism. He's a really rare linebacker who doesn't really even need to take on blocks because he can just go around them. He's a more than effective tackler, which blends with his instincts. And combine all of those, he turns into someone that on a play-by-play basis you have to account for.
Yeah, Nick Martin is one of the best linebackers in the Big 12. And I would have told you that at the beginning of this year. And although sometimes PFF grades get it right, sometimes they really don't. They sort of have Nick Martin as up and down, but really solid up against Tulsa and Utah. I think he's been good this entire year. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's just so versatile and not in the like Wayne Jones way where he doesn't really have a home. No, he's a true linebacker with plus athleticism. And again, him being valued as a day 3 guy, I think it's just showing you that the linebacker value is very similar to the running back value, where it's been very, very depressed in terms of NFL value. But yeah, Nick Martin, really, really good linebacker.
Yeah. He'll be a huge factor in this game. And that takes us to a guy that had himself a big moment in the Utah game, and that's Kendall Daniels. He had a great interception in the latter portions of that game to keep Oklahoma State in it. However, he's listed as a safety. We'll put that in quotation marks because he really is just a hybrid player that we are kind of used to seeing in West Virginia and Baylor's defenses. He's not quite a safety, but he's more of a star linebacker. So he's just a very athletic player who does a little bit of everything in their defense. But the big issue right now is that he's trying to fill the shoes of Colin Oliver, and that's just not something that he is really built to do. He's just not even close to the same pass rusher that Colin Oliver is, which is not a knock on Kendall Daniels at all. But I mean, when you put them both in the star linebacker position, Colin Oliver is much closer to being a defensive end, and Kendall Daniels is much closer to being a safety. If you're looking at a hybrid spectrum relative to where they're at as a kind of a hybrid linebacker. But regardless, Kendall Daniels is still a really effective player. And despite playing him in some different roles in some different places, he still did show in that Utah game that he does have the ability to make some splash plays in the pass game for that defense.
Yeah, and Kendall Daniels is really, really solid as a sort of as that sort of hybrid player. Trey Rucker was actually the one that got the interceptions, by the way.
Oh, it was. I thought it was Daniels.
Nope, I thought the exact same thing while I was writing this. No, it was Trey Rucker.
I was gonna say I watched the game and I thought it was Daniels.
But yeah, I think it's because they're numbered 5 and 9, so the numbers are pretty similar.
Oh,
but,
well, that's probably what it was.
But yeah, Kendall Daniels is, I think, right now just in a really unenviable position because they moved him down to a spot where he probably shouldn't be playing because that's Colin Oliver's spot, and his tackling has taken a massive dip because of it. And he's just not the same run defender. And a lot of it does have to do with the size that he's playing at. Plus, he's never really been a linebacker before or a defensive lineman before. He was a strong safety. And right now he's playing like a Bear strong safety. And the Bear front died for a reason. There's a reason no one does that anymore. But anyway, you have Trey Rucker, who is their free safety, in quotations, but he's also another member of the defense that has AARP eligibility.
Oh, well, excellent. It's glad to know that we're going against a team just filled with the oldest people on earth. But yeah, that takes us to Trey Rucker. He had 2 picks against Utah. You see, if I'd only read ahead in the outline, then I would have known that I was incorrect. And he blended that with a really impressive tackling performance as well. Nick Martin's gotten a lot more hype, though, but he may be their best defensive player, all things equal.
Yeah, seeing the development of Trey Rucker, because he wasn't very good last year, but he's just been on a heater. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he is – I mean, he's listed as being a lot more in the box than being a true free safety. Not kind of, but he's just sort of a chess piece that you can move throughout the defensive backfield. And he has the speed to really make it work. And he's a big reason why Oklahoma State is able to run the aggressive form of man coverage that they have. Because, a lot of teams – they'll only have, 1 or 2 deep routes on the play. And Rucker is good enough to where he can sort of split the difference between the 2 routes and just say, I'll help out whoever needs it most here. So Trey Rucker is basically the only guy on the team that I would consistently trust to play zone coverage, not because, I think the others are bad at it, but just because I think they're kind of unproven with it. But yeah, those are the most notable players for this Oklahoma State team on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. So now we can go into the stories to watch going into this game. And I feel like the most important story from a K-State perspective is how do you bounce back from what just happened? I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah. I really hope this team has a short memory because if they let the BYU game beat us twice, then we could be in for a really long year because this could really start a snowball. I think this is a huge game for us, given that it's a home in particular, but it's going to be a really tough game because it's kind of a must win for Oklahoma State as well. Because, you're looking at 2 teams that have Big 12 title aspirations, and they're both starting out conference play with a loss. So, they both really need a win, or they might kind of be de facto eliminated from the Big 12 championship game. But K-State has to find a way to leave BYU in the rearview mirror. Which in the past, K-State has generally been pretty decent at refocusing after losses. And kind of using it maybe as fuel. I'm not sure if that's exactly what they do, but that's kind of what it feels like. But if Kleiman can keep the team focused, and if Avery Johnson can refocus, and I think maybe most of all, if the team can just prevent the um, bad plays from spiraling, then we're going to stand a really good chance in this game.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I went over this in the BYU recap. I don't think a game like BYU is going to happen again. And I think a big part of what made that game so bad was things snowballed so quickly. And it just kind of, a lot of it was shock, I think. And I don't think that that's going to happen again. I think this team is smart enough and mature enough to sort of move past that. But you also touched on the basically what's going to be the next thing that I was going to ask, which is, this is two Big 12 teams staring down the barrel of an 0-2 start in conference play. And granted, I think that there will be one team that makes it to Arlington with 2 conference losses. The thing is, that's going to be a lot of teams that have that. So you're going to need some form of tiebreaker. Because I think that the top contenders are still Utah, K-State, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State is on the outside looking in on that, because I will begrudgingly admit that Iowa State has been much better than I think that they were given credit for in the preseason, and I do say that begrudgingly. But I think that those are like the 4 schools I would say that are in tier 1. So there's going to be 3. I'm pretty sure. I know K-State plays Oklahoma State and Iowa State. Does Oklahoma State and Iowa State play one another?
I actually do not know. I hope so. But that would be perfectly convenient if they didn't, I guess.
But yeah,
they do not play
okay.
Iowa State.
That's great. So, in other words, K-State needs this tiebreaker in particular. And they probably need the tiebreaker up against Iowa State too, but that's a much, much later problem. Because if there is a team that's going to get in to the Big 12 championship with 2 losses, it's almost certainly because they got in via tiebreaker. And I don't think that any team in the Big 12 championship enters undefeated. But again, it's just, you're staring down the barrel of something really, really scary here for both teams.
Yeah. And so we're going to see a hyper-motivated Oklahoma State team, I'd imagine, as well, coming off a home loss to a fellow Big 12 title contender. So it's going to be a pretty emotional game, I'd imagine, for both squads. And I mean, it's still super early, but I mean, it does kind of have the feel of a must win. I mean, it's not necessarily like a complete 100% absolutely must win, but it's not far from it. Because I mean, if you're K-State and you fall to 0-2, your best shot at getting in, if you get to 6-3, you're pretty much not going in at all, unless just something insane happens. But 7-2, that means you have to go undefeated for the rest of the fall and Big 12 conference play, and you have to have some extra breaks go your way. So it's not this is a really high stakes game. I'm not really sure what else to add to it, but it's huge for both teams. I mean, whoever loses this game is going to be really sputtering at that point.
Yeah. And the last story I think to watch before we go into projections for this game is Oklahoma State likes running man coverage. Can the K-State receivers break away from this team who really likes to play man coverage? And I mean, BYU also likes to play man coverage. Here's the thing. I don't count that game. Everything went wrong. That game doesn't count. So
yeah, I mean, can K-State receivers get open? I think in theory, yeah. I mean, Jace Brown, he was targeted 9 times in that BYU game, but he only had 4 receptions, and I think he had at least one genuine, like actual, just straight up drop. And then he had another that he could have caught but wasn't able to hang on, which I don't know if it counted as a drop or not. Keegan, he got open plenty, but he had a drop too. Um, so I guess we've seen at least 2 receivers that are capable of getting open. Keegan can get himself open. Jace can get himself open. Even Dante Cephas, he got himself open on that first drive and just was overthrown a bit. I think he stumbled a little too, which that's kind of becoming common with him. But like we really need the receivers to step up. I think they can get open, but can they complete the route? Can they do the little things? The tight ends are going to be fine. I mean, we're going to be without Lofton for a few weeks. It's not season ending allegedly. But Kleiman said in his press conference that we're not going to have him for a little bit. And that was kind of a big deal after these last few weeks because Lofton was really a pleasant surprise. Although on the flip side, Garrett Oakley did have his best game of the season against BYU. So he should be back. And we know how much we love using the tight ends in the passing game right now. So that's another consideration that we have to have. Also, I didn't mention this on the recap because we were too sad, but Will Ancio, he had his first catch in the BYU game towards the end. So congratulations to him. It was completely meaningless, but he still did it, and it counts.
You know what? Good for him, man.
I agree.
But now we can go into the projections, and you can start off with your offensive MVP.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Avery in this one. I think it has to be Avery in this game. Unless we're somehow able to find a way for DJ to go for like 150 or 200 or something in this game, which I would absolutely accept. I really do think if we want to win this game, I think it needs to be Avery Johnson as the MVP.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep saying it, and eventually it'll come true. I'm gonna go with Dylan Edwards, and I know that he's gotten like 7 touches every single week up to this point. This is another example of a defense where I think Dylan Edwards would be really, really useful, especially in the receiving game, because I don't think that when you have a defense that really likes to play man coverage, you have 2 choices: Dylan Edwards on a linebacker, which good freaking luck, or I mean, unless it's Nick Martin. Nick Martin could probably do it, but even then, you're making a choice between covering Dylan Edwards, one of the tight ends, or DJ. All of those are legitimate big play threats, but I think Dylan Edwards is just the most important one. And I know that defenses are keying in on him every time that he's on the field. But the fact that he's still getting those touches is showing that he can still do something when he's the center of attention.
Yeah, I mean, in that BYU game, he had once again, it was 7 touches, which is so stupid, but he he had 6 rushes for 41 yards. So I mean, he's still producing and he's still doing what he needs to do. We just need to get him the ball a little more, which I don't know what it's going to take. Seems like you kind of have to slap the staff in the face with it for them to really get the message. Like with Avery running the ball more, I think that's finally getting across. But Dylan touching the ball more, maybe we're finally going to see that happen a little bit more. Can we at least get 8? Can we do 8 this week? We're going to work our way to double digits.
We're on the road to double-digit Dylan Edwards. But my pick for defensive MVP is going to be Marquise Siegel, because a lot of the offense that Oklahoma State is going to run is going to be screen, slant, deep ball. And Jordan Riley has been up and down. I don't think he's been as bad as people want to say. I think that he's just given up a couple really unfortunate plays, and he's getting sauced for it, which is the exact same thing that happened to Siegel last year. But I think that Siegs has the opportunity to have a really, really good game against an offense that will try to get Ollie Gordon going, but Siegel is one of the best run support safeties in the Big 12. And the moment that they ask Alan Bowman to try and throw a slant, that's another reason why Marquis Siegel is really, really good, because he can cover slant windows. Him alongside Dez are both really, really good at that. So I think a lot of it is going to be strength on strength, where Oklahoma State's strength is the vertical game and letting their receivers make plays. And I think a lot of K-State's strengths are sort of, covering the slant windows and trying to limit after the catch. So I'm going to go with Siegs as my defensive MVP.
I'm going with Austin Romaine. At this point, I'm just kind of playing the odds because he has been the best player on defense so far this year, and he's really yet to have a genuinely not good game. And I think that he's going to probably be the focal point of trying to limit Ollie Gordon. I mean, maybe I'm completely stereotyping him because he's a Mike linebacker, and I shouldn't assume these things about him. But, I mean, he's been so effective already this year. I imagine that we see him tackle Ollie Gordon a few times. We'll probably send him on some blitzes too. He's been oddly really effective as a blitzer, as a Mike linebacker. He might be the best at that in the country, mainly because I don't know how many Mike linebackers are genuinely effective pass rushers. So, I mean, he has that in his toolkit, but I'll roll with Austin Romaine here.
All right. So now the moment of truth. K-State wins if, K-State loses if, and what is your official score projection?
K-State wins this game if they keep Ollie Gordon to what he's been doing and they let Alan Bowman be himself, which by that I mean not letting him play better than he is. I mean, the best game for Oklahoma State this year was the Tulsa game, and I think Alan Bowman threw like 5 touchdowns in that game, which, I mean, I think you should have to retire if you allow that to Alan Bowman. So it's got to be that. You have to limit Alan Bowman and then take care of the football, which is such a basic one, but I feel obligated to say it after last week. So
after recent events.
Yeah, per recent tragedies, we have to make this disclaimer. So, but K-State's going to lose this game if they let Ollie Gordon get back to his old self, and they let things snowball again. So don't let last week live on, because if they do that, then like it's over before it starts. And contain Ollie Gordon as best you reasonably can. Score prediction, though, I have K-State winning 28-24.
For me, K-State wins. I'm going to just go ahead and steal containing Ollie Gordon. But I'm also going to add on to containing the screen game and not letting Oklahoma State's other playmakers beat you, because I don't think that this is going to be a game where you're going to get to Alan Bowman all that much, because for all of his faults, that man does not take sacks because the ball is out. It's gone. He's not going to hold on to the ball for more than like 2.5 seconds at any given time. But I think the biggest key to this game is just K-State's receivers making just enough in terms of plays. I don't need everyone to get open on a single play. You need one person to get open on any given play. That's all you need. And then Avery just needs to be able to find them and hit them in rhythm. To me, K-State loses this game if basically Oklahoma State is allowed to play exactly how they want, which is if they get Ollie Gordon involved, and if we can't get receivers to separate, whether it be through natural talent, or maybe creating a few rubs and pick routes. We can't let Oklahoma State get into their groove, because it's very, very difficult to sort of snap them out of it whenever they're in that situation. That's pretty much what happened last year, is they found their groove after the K-State game. And then, of course, because naturally they lost that groove in the Texas game and sort of have been stumbling to try and retain it at the beginning of this year. So I hope that we are not the team that they get right against, because that's happened a few times and I'm kind of getting tired of it. But I'm not going to lie to you. I think that this game is going to be ugly. This game is probably going to be a rock fight. My honest score projection is like 17-10 K-State. This is going to be a miserable game to watch. If both teams have it the way they want it, this game is going to suck. But that's just the way that these teams kind of want to play.
I will gladly take that after last week. So,
yep. Do you have any final notes other than this is the grand reunion of the Alleycat section, also known as you and I sitting next to one another?
No, I've got nothing else for this one.
All right. Well, if that's the case, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00.
I'm Matt Conabatsor, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store, as well as supporters link both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.